We need you back. The chores aren't getting done, Mom's voice cracked over the phone. I immediately blocked both their numbers. A week later, there they were, standing on my doorstep. I don't even know where to begin, it's been simmering inside me for so long, I feel like I'm about to burst. Maybe saying it out loud, or even writing it down, will help me keep it together. My name is Stella, and I'm 22. I pour lattes and cappuccinos at a cute little coffee shop a few blocks from my apartment. I hadn't planned on moving out quite so soon, or, well, like this. But here I am, perched on the edge of my miniature couch in my even tinier living room, nursing a lukewarm coffee because I honestly can't muster the energy to reheat it, trying to make sense of everything that's happened. I grew up in a small town, not exactly the boonies, but definitely not a bustling metropolis. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, whether you want them to or not. I have two younger siblings, Roger, who's 18, and Jill, who's 15. And from day one, I was the responsible one. That's what my parents called me, like it was some sort of prestigious award. Stella, you're the oldest, you have to set an example. Stella, your brother and sister look up to you. Stella, could you help me with this? Do that? Take care of this. Be the bigger person. And for years, I did. I did everything they asked of me because I genuinely believed that was just what being the oldest sibling entailed. It didn't dawn on me until much later, way too late, that being the responsible one was just a sugar-coated way of saying, Stella, we're going to offload all the household responsibilities onto you while Roger and Jill get to do whatever their teenage hearts desire. It started gradually. When I was younger, it was small stuff, helping Roger with his math homework, watching Jill while Mom ran out for groceries, setting the table for dinner. Then, by middle school, I was actually making dinner. By high school, I was tackling the laundry, doing the grocery shopping, vacuuming the house, washing mountains of dishes, scrubbing toilets until they sparkled. If there was a chore that needed tackling, it somehow magically became my chore. Meanwhile, Roger and Jill, well, they got to enjoy the carefree, quintessential teenage experience, while I essentially became a part-time, unpaid housekeeper. And my parents, they just seemed to think it was perfectly normal, like it was my ordained duty. You should be grateful you have a family to take care of, Mom would lecture me, with a slight tone of annoyance, whenever I dared to voice a complaint. At least you're not paying rent. That was the unspoken, but ironclad, rule in our house, as long as you're living here rent-free, you owe us your labor. It seemed reasonable enough at first. Okay, I thought, I don't contribute financially, so it's only right I help out. The problem was, that logic should have applied equally to everyone under our roof. But it didn't. Roger and Jill weren't paying rent either, yet they seemed exempt from any kind of chore. Roger, permanently attached to his computer screen, lost in video games and YouTube rabbit holes, was never asked to do anything. Jill, equally absorbed in FaceTime calls and TikTok scrolling, was equally untouched. But the moment I dared to sit down for 5 minutes, Mom would appear, seemingly out of nowhere, with, Stella, can you unload the dishwasher? The blatant unfairness stung. Maybe if I'd possessed more courage, I would have spoken up sooner, but I didn't. I just silently endured it, clinging to the naive hope that things would somehow magically change as I got older. They didn't. The breaking point arrived last Thursday. I just survived a grueling 9-hour shift at work. My feet throbbed, my uniform reeked of stale coffee, and my patience was stretched thinner than tissue paper. All I craved was to get home, kick off my shoes, and just rest. I pushed open the front door and was immediately assaulted by the smell, greasy, leftover takeout. I walked into the living room, and there it was, exactly as I'd predicted. Roger's half-eaten plate of food sat smack dab on the coffee table, surrounded by a constellation of crumbs. I just stood there, staring at it, the frustration bubbling up inside me. It wasn't an isolated incident. Roger made a habit of eating in the living room, abandoning his mess, and retreating to his computer, seemingly oblivious to the fact that plates don't magically disappear. Usually, I just roll my eyes and clean it up myself, because arguing with him was a futile exercise. But that night, something shifted. That night, I'd reached my limit. I didn't touch the plate. I walked straight past it, heading for the sanctuary of my room. But before I could even sink into my bed, I heard Mom's voice calling from the kitchen, "Stella, could you clean up the table? Roger left his plate out again." I swear, I almost laughed, a bitter, hysterical sound. I turned around, walked back out, leaned against the doorway, and just stared at her. "Why can't Roger do it?" The words came out flat, devoid of any inflection. Mom's blank stare felt like a personal indictment. "Because he's busy," she said, as if that explained everything. Busy? I knew perfectly well what busy meant in Roger's world, glued to his computer, lost in the virtual world of League of Legends, no doubt screaming into his headset over a game. I just walked in the door, the exhaustion settling into my bones after a long shift. "I just got home from work, Mom." My voice remained level, though a knot of frustration was tightening in my chest. "I've been on my feet all day, and you want me to clean up after Roger?" That familiar look crossed her face, the one that always said, "Stella, you're being unreasonable, as usual. Stella, you're the oldest. You should be setting an example. It's just a plate. Just a plate." Those two words were the spark that ignited the tinderbox inside me. I slammed my hand on the counter, the force of it making the silverware jump and clatter. "No, Mom, it's not just a plate. It's the endless pile of chores, the constant expectation that I'll pick up everyone else's slack while Roger and Jill do absolutely nothing. It's the blatant disregard for the fact that I work my ass off, and you still see me as your personal maid. I'm done, Mom. I am so completely done with this." Mom's face hardened, her jaw tightening. "You're being dramatic, Stella." I actually laughed, a short, humorless sound. If she thought this was dramatic, she was in for a rude awakening. Grabbing my keys from the counter, I turned to face her. "I'm moving out." The word hit the room like a stone. Her face was a mask of disbelief. "What?" "I've been saving up for months, putting away every extra penny I could." I met her gaze, letting the words sink in. "I don't need this anymore. I refuse to live in a house where I'm treated like a goddamn servant, taken for granted every single day." For a split second, a flicker of something, regret, maybe, crossed her face. "Where are you even going to go?" she asked, her voice laced with a hint of worry. "I'll figure it out," I snapped back, already moving towards the front door. She followed me, her voice rising in pitch. "Stella, you don't have to do this. You're overreacting. Please just stay, Stella." I didn't break stride. I walked out, got into my car, and started the engine. I didn't have a destination in mind, no clear plan of action. But as I pulled away from the curb, one thing was crystal clear: I couldn't spend another minute, another second, under that roof. I was leaving. I didn't have a plan, but any plan had to be better than this. The streetlights outside became a hazy blur as I drove, my hands clenched so tightly on the steering wheel that my knuckles ached. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat mirroring the chaos in my head. I could still hear my mother's voice, that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. The way she dismissed my feelings, as if years of quiet servitude meant nothing. As if coming home exhausted after a grueling shift only to be treated like hired help was perfectly acceptable. I pulled into the empty parking lot of a 24-hour diner and simply sat there, staring blankly at the dashboard. My breath hitched in my chest, a shallow, uneven rhythm. Had I really just walked out? That wasn't like me. I wasn't one for grand gestures, for dramatic pronouncements. I usually swallowed it all down, kept the peace. But tonight, something inside me just broke. Numbly, I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contact list. Who could I even call? Most of my friends had left after graduation, chasing dreams in other cities. The few who remained were still entangled in their own family dramas, their own lives. I couldn't impose, couldn't show up on someone's doorstep, a sudden inconvenience. My pride, or maybe just plain stubbornness, wouldn't allow it. Then, against my better judgment, I glanced at my messages. Mom, 1 missed call. Then, Stella, come home. This is absurd. And finally, dripping with contempt, you're acting like a child. There was one from Roger, LMAO, what the hell is wrong with you? Mom's freaking out. Just come clean the house and stop being dramatic. And a final, pointed message from Jill, Mom's crying. Hope you're happy. A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips as I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. Of course they were. Of course, I was the villain. That's how they interpreted it, of course. Not as years of enduring unfair treatment, not as me finally finding the strength to assert myself. No, it was simply me being dramatic. I knew that if I responded, if I went back even for a moment, the dynamic would remain unchanged. Mom would release a breath of relief, telling me how glad she was that I came to my senses, and by the following day, I'd be back to cleaning up their messes as if nothing had ever happened. But not this time. I spent the next several hours immersed in apartment listings, deliberately ignoring the constant stream of texts flooding my phone. Most of the places were financially out of reach, but I discovered a small studio in a less desirable area of town that I could manage if I significantly dipped into my savings. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it would be mine. By the following day, I had signed the lease. I moved out within the week. I didn't disclose my new address to my family. Instead, I packed my belongings when I knew they wouldn't be home, left my key on the kitchen counter, and walked out the door without a second glance. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt like I could truly breathe. The initial days felt surreal. I woke up in the morning without a list of chores hanging over my head. I came home from work and could actually relax without someone constantly calling my name. I ate when I was hungry, slept when I was tired, and did whatever I felt like doing, and it was absolutely wonderful. The silence was strange at first, but I quickly adapted. I bought myself an inexpensive couch, organized my small space, and began the process of learning how to simply exist without being constantly needed and used. Then the calls started. Initially, it was just a voicemail from Mom. Her voice was strained, carefully controlled. Stella, we need you to come back home. The house is a mess. You left your things everywhere and no one is doing the chores. Your dad's been complaining. Just come back for a little while, okay? I deleted it without replying. The next day, a text message appeared on my phone from Roger. Mom says you need to come home and help out. The house is falling apart. Those words glared back at me from the screen, and a familiar knot tightened in my stomach. Did they even care about me anymore? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, itching to type a response, but the longer I stared at the message, the more my anger simmered. Not a single, "How are you, Stella?" Not a single inquiry about whether I was safe, had a roof over my head, or needed anything at all. They were oblivious to the fact that I was teetering on the edge, about to shatter. They just wanted their domestic help back. I slammed my phone down, ignoring the message. Then the barrage started. Mom, Roger, even Jill. My phone buzzed incessantly. Mom's text, Stella, this has gone far enough. You can't just walk away from your family. Roger, you're unbelievably selfish. Mom and Dad are falling apart because of your actions. Jill, I don't understand why you're doing this. Please, just come home. By the end of the week, my voicemail was overflowing, the screen displaying over 20 missed calls. In a moment of frustration and exhaustion, I blocked them all. For a few precious days, silence descended. Then, late one night, my phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number. Without thinking, I answered. Stella. My blood ran cold. It was Dad. He never called. A text message requesting I run an errand was the extent of our communication. The fact that he was calling now could only mean one thing: they were desperate. "Dad," I said, my voice tight. His tone was devoid of emotion. "Are you finished with this charade yet?" I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. "What do you mean, charade? You've proven your point, okay? Your mother is beside herself with worry, your siblings are miserable, and we can't continue living like this. It's time for you to come home." A short, humorless laugh escaped my lips. "So, let me understand this. The house is a disaster, no one's lifting a finger, and instead of talking to Roger and Jill about cleaning up their own messes, you're calling me?" I could practically hear the condescension dripping from his voice, like he was scolding a misbehaving child. "Stella, we all have responsibilities. You can't just abandon ship when things get difficult." My blood ran cold. That's rich, considering I seem to recall being the only one with responsibilities back when I lived there. Roger and Jill conveniently got to relax while I did everything. Now that I'm gone, suddenly you're all incapable. Sounds like a you problem, not a me problem. His tone grew sharper, more accusatory. "Watch your mouth. We took care of you." I didn't let him finish. "No, I took care of all of you. Stella," he finally said, his voice tight with suppressed frustration, "this family. This family didn't give a damn about me until they lost their live-in maid." I hung up the phone, the dial tone a buzzing insult in my ear. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my hands trembling, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A relentless voice in my head screamed at me to feel guilty, to turn around, to rush back and fix everything, make it all better again. But I clenched my jaw and forced the thought down, burying it deep. I wasn't their fixer anymore. I refused to be. The next few weeks became a process of slow, painstaking healing. I threw myself into work, pouring all my energy into excelling. I focused on making my apartment feel like a home, a sanctuary that was mine and mine alone. Most importantly, I started to explore what it meant to actually live life for me, instead of constantly prioritizing everyone else's needs and wants. There were still moments, unexpected and unwelcome, when the tendrils of guilt would creep in, wrapping around my heart and squeezing tight. But every time I even considered giving in, every time I was tempted to respond, I forced myself to remember the truth: they didn't miss me. They missed what I did for them. And I was determined to never go back to being that person again. It had been 3 weeks, 3 whole weeks since I walked out of that house for what I hoped was the last time. 3 weeks of silence. Well, not complete silence. I still had work, I was developing a new routine that I was actually enjoying, and I still had my own life to deal with, my own challenges and triumphs. But there was complete silence from them. No calls, no texts, no emails, nothing. It was almost unnerving how quickly they seemed to have moved on, as if I had never even existed in their lives. And for a fleeting, ridiculous second, I almost allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had finally understood. That they had finally realized I was serious this time, that I wasn't coming back to play the martyr, and that they would have to figure things out on their own. Then, on a completely ordinary Thursday evening, just as I was settling in with a book, my phone rang. The word "Mom" glared back at me from the screen, and my stomach churned. Logically, I knew better than to answer. History screamed at me to ignore it. But some stubborn, foolish part of me still craved her voice, so I swiped to answer. "Stella," she exhaled, a sound like she'd been holding her breath for an eternity. "We need to talk." My jaw tightened instinctively. "What is there to talk about, Mom?" She sighed, drawn out and weighty, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Stella, please. Enough of this stubbornness. You've proven your point. Can you just come home and help us?" A bitter laugh escaped me, a harsh, involuntary sound. "Help you? You mean come back and revert to being your unpaid servant? Absolutely not. Stella, please don't be this way. The house is a complete mess. Your father's been under incredible stress. And Roger and Jill, well, they're simply not equipped to handle everything. We're drowning here. My voice sharpened. Maybe you should have considered the consequences of allowing them to be utterly useless for their entire lives. It's not my responsibility, Mom. It should never have been. Her tone turned steely. We are your family. No, I replied, my grip on the phone tightening until my knuckles were white. I was your maid. And then, the familiar wave of guilt crashed over me. Stella, your father hasn't been doing well at all. His blood pressure is dangerously high. He's barely sleeping. This constant stress is going to be the end of him. There it was. The nuclear option. The blatant manipulation. If I didn't rush back, I would be directly responsible for my father's deteriorating health, maybe even his death. That particular tactic. I really should have anticipated it. I should have shielded myself. It still stung, though. Despite all the resentment I harbored for how they'd always treated me, a part of me, however small, remained tethered to them. I couldn't wish ill on my dad. And they knew that, of course. They always knew precisely which chords to strike, how to excavate that tiny sliver of my being that felt obligated to them. But then, like a tidal wave, the anger crashed back. I inhaled deeply, consciously calming my voice. I hope Dad finds a way to manage, but I'm not coming back. If he's overwhelmed, tell Roger and Jill to finally pull their weight for once. A gasp escaped her lips, as if I'd blasphemed. Stella, they're practically children. I nearly launched my phone across the room. Roger is 18. I was younger than that when I was practically running the entire household. Don't pretend they're incapable. They've just never needed to, because you've always piled everything on me. She attempted to interject, but I shut her down. I'm finished, Mom. I don't care how bad it becomes over there. You all created this situation, now deal with the consequences. Then I disconnected the call. I remained there for a long time, my heart hammering in my chest, my hands trembling slightly, bracing myself for the inevitable guilt, the regret, for that insidious inner voice to begin its familiar litany of self-doubt, whispering that perhaps I'd been too severe. But it never materialized. Instead, I experienced relief. Pure, unadulterated relief. Like, for the first time in my life, I'd actually held my ground, finally prioritized my own well-being instead of allowing them to manipulate me into resolving their problems. And that should have been the conclusion. But it wasn't. A few days later, I returned home from work and immediately, a prickling unease settled over me. My stomach clenched. I lived in a reasonably secure neighborhood, yet the moment I entered my apartment building, I sensed it. That strange, oppressive weight in the atmosphere, as though someone had been lying in wait. I rounded the corner into my hallway, and there they were, positioned outside my apartment door, resembling some sort of unwelcome intervention. I froze in my tracks, my heart pounding violently against my ribcage. What in the world are you doing here? Mom's voice cracked, and I saw the redness around her eyes, the puffiness that spoke volumes of tears shed on the drive over. Stella, please, she pleaded, can't we just talk? My gaze flickered to Dad. He stood there, a statue of disapproval, arms locked across his chest, jaw tight. And then there was Roger, hands shoved deep in his pockets, pointedly avoiding my eyes, focusing on anything but me. A harsh laugh escaped my lips. Honestly, what else was there left to do? You've got to be kidding me right now. Mom sniffled, pulling herself together. We just want you to come home. The weight of my bag seemed to multiply as I dropped it to the floor. I crossed my arms, a defensive shield. Are you serious? You ambush me at my apartment like this? Couldn't you take the hint when I stopped answering your calls? Dad cleared his throat, that familiar sound that usually preceded a lecture. Stella, we need to sort this out. You're making things harder for everyone. A bitter taste coated my tongue. I shook my head. No, Dad. You're just angry that I finally stood up for myself, that I finally said no. Roger actually rolled his eyes. Jesus, can you drop the act for 5 minutes? Don't you even care that Mom's been crying herself to sleep, that Dad's a walking stress bomb, that the whole house is falling apart now you've gone? Something in his tone, in his words, finally shattered the fragile composure I was clinging to. I took a step, then another, until I was standing right in front of him, close enough to see the flecks of green in his eyes. My voice was low, controlled, dangerous even to my own ears. You know what, Roger? No. I don't give a damn. Because for years, I was the one crying every night. For years, I was the one who was stressed out of my mind, trying to hold everything together while you were locked in your stupid room, lost in video games. And not once did you give a damn. So now it's your turn to deal with it. Roger actually flinched, and a surge of something close to satisfaction coursed through me, but I wasn't finished. I turned to Mom, the real target of my anger. And you let this happen. You let them get away with treating me like that. You made me believe that I had to be the one to do everything. And the second I decided to finally live my own life, you laid on the guilt trip so thick I could barely breathe. I don't owe you anything. Mom's face crumpled, as if I'd physically struck her. Stella, please, we can still fix this. I held up my hand, stopping her. No, Mom. We can't. I'm finished. Utterly. I'm no longer willing to be the one who cleans up their messes, the one they blame for everything, the emergency parent they call when they can't be bothered. I have built a life for myself, finally, and they simply don't fit into it. Turning away, I snatched my bag from the floor and fumbled with the lock on my apartment door. Get out, I said, the word sharp. Leave now. For a heart-stopping moment, I braced myself, expecting my father to protest, to try and reason with me, but instead, he just let out a long, weary sigh and dragged his hand down his face. Fine, he mumbled, defeated. Let's just go. Behind him, I heard my mother's muffled sobs, and a curse muttered from Roger. Then, finally, the silence of the door closing behind them. As the click echoed in the apartment, I released the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I had done it. I was free. The future is a vast, unknown territory, and I have no idea what direction it will take me. But one thing is certain, I refuse to revert to that life. And for the first time, truly, I felt a lightness inside, a sense of possibility. It's a bitter truth that the most difficult thing you may ever do is sever ties. But sometimes, walking away is the only way to salvage your own well-being.